Canada shouldn't be divided. That's what Premier David Eby says. Justin Trudeau racks up the appointments before he leaves. Karina Gold blames Justin Trudeau. Mark Carney caught in a lie. And is Jagmeet Singh a serious politician? All that and more on The Really Big Show with myself, Jim Check of Kelowna Now, and Ian Burns, our managing editor. How are you doing this morning?
Howdy ho.
Got a really big show as usual. We got beautiful weather here in the Okanagan. You got some snow there in Ottawa?
A lot of snow, yeah. Sort of looks a bit like the Arctic out there.
There you go. Kelowna looking beautiful. You can see our live shot there, traffic flowing very nicely. So good stuff in Kelowna and snowfall in Ottawa. Eby, we'll start off with David Eby. He says Canada shouldn't be divided. And he says all those interprovincial barriers should come down.
It's an old story, though, isn't it? That's the thing. How many times? But it's similar to how many of these problems that Canada faces are like ancient, dusty problems at this point, like interprovincial trade. Why is that even an issue anymore? Why wasn't that fixed like 100 years ago? You know what I mean? It's absolutely bonkers. And then I fear that if Donald Trump doesn't go ahead with these tariffs, that this will just be forgotten again, and Canada will go back to being complacent and trading more with the US than with other provinces. It's just completely ridiculous that this is even an issue.
Yeah, they didn't even want to tackle it because this healthcare crisis we've been facing for quite a while across Canada. And it wasn't until Pierre Poilievre's campaign talking about how he wants to do similar to the Red Seal program so that people are licensed across Canada, which seems to make sense. Now all of a sudden, David Eby and some others are on there and saying we need to get that done. But it's just surprising that it hasn't been done a long time ago. Like, what would be holding it back? Why wouldn't we trust them? And my daughter happens to be a nurse, and she has to get licensed both in BC and in Alberta to work in both provinces, costing her
But it's
twice
like
the fees.
it's the question. I think it boils down to what you have to call, it's a bit of a cliche term, to the point it's so much of a cliche that it almost doesn't mean anything. But I think it comes down to special interest groups, or in other words, small groups of people who want to protect what they have, their power, their prestige, their money, whatever it is. They want to protect their little corner of Canada, and they're willing to make the rest of the country suffer if they can have that. And we see this, there are so many different versions of this. One of them, probably the biggest, is the entire province of Quebec, I'm sorry to say. But then you also have tiny First Nations of like 200 people that block entire infrastructure projects. You have these people in these professional colleges and professional groups that make things like this impossible and screw up like the health system in their own little way. I mean, there's just all of these tiny little groups that they just do not care about the rest of the country. They care about themselves. And you'd like to think, wouldn't you, that this trade war that may or may not go into a kind of full-blown combat in the next few years, you would like to think that that is going to focus people's minds, and that the likes of David Eby and the Prime Minister will just ride over these special interest groups and do what's right instead of what they want. But I'm not entirely sure that that'll happen, really. I mean, we've seen, just as an example, we've seen the federal government and Justin Trudeau repeatedly talk about the evils of Facebook and Meta, and how because of the banning of news in Canada, they put people's lives at risk and so on. And then what happened a couple of weeks ago? They gave hundreds of thousands of dollars to Meta, at least hundreds of thousands of taxpayers' money to Meta to advertise. So, they talk the talk, but then when it comes down to it, they're just feeble, spineless frauds. And I fear that we're in for more of that, really.
And I can imagine during the election that's apparently upcoming that they'll be spending a lot on Meta and still blocking news outlets from going on there. We actually got an article that we're going to be putting up on that and how important it is to get the Meta block off this news election, because it's hard to get news out there. And then, they're talking about doubling the CBC budget, and at the same time, most news outlets are blocked from getting their message out.
And at the same time, the Liberal government tells us how much they love independent media and how important journalism is to democracy.
Right. Amid this trade war and tariff war, Steve McDonald did, or this is actually a Canadian press story that we put up on our site, that small town mayors say, let's keep it friendly on the borders, because a lot of them rely on the American customers, including here in Big White. When I did the last Big White report, I did that with Michael J, saying that, like more than half the customers up there at Big White are Americans. And the mayor, Associate Mayor Sue McCordoff, saying, like she doesn't want to really start a war with their people, because a lot of the economy is from the United States there on that border thing with Orville on across the line there. And the same thing goes in Roslyn, BC. Mayor Andy Morrill says, they have this beautiful little mountain community, the ski hill, that 75% of the city's economy is driven by American tourists. So they're saying they don't really want to be, driving a wedge between Americans. Then, like there's one thing to have discussions about the Trump administration. The other thing is to start picking on American people themselves.
Yeah, but I do think the Canadians have been generally very, very well behaved in that regard, considering the nature of this attack on the country by the American leader. I think Canadians have kind of they've
Well,
behaved in an exemplary fashion, I would say, actually, and
well,
to be fair, so have most Americans.
I would say a lot of our politicians have not. And when we're talking, we're going to get to that later. We'll get to that though. We'll leave that for right now. Um, the Prime Minister, this is a Holly Dome Blacklock story, racking up the appointments before he leaves. As he resigned on January 6th, but records show that he's appointed since then 4 senators, 6 ambassadors, 14 judges, and the reappointment of a former Liberal MP whose term at the federal agency did not expire until months after Trudeau leaves office. So, in his words, he's like, I made a personal commitment to bring new leadership and a new tone to Ottawa. So he's kind of doing the old Joe Biden there. He's just making as much appointments, and it's kind of mind blowing, actually.
Yeah, well, he's trying to leave a legacy, it seems, in the sort of apparatus of the state, so that when he's gone, his people are still there.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I guess, you can understand the instinct to do that, but it's the ethics of that. That's a different question. Is that the right thing to do? I mean, a lot of people would say no, but if there's anything that Trudeau has introduced, it's like a much more partisan atmosphere, I would say, and it's like all about the Liberal Party, isn't it, rather than what's best for the country, I sometimes
That
sense.
that seems to be apparent. And then here we have Karina Gold. Now she's claiming that she was speaking up. She claims the prime minister just wouldn't listen. So she's saying that she often raised her voice against Justin Trudeau in the cabinet. We didn't get things right, she admits, who spent 8 years as a cabinet minister. Um, there are times that we weren't listening to Canadians. And she's done a lot of reflecting and says that like they could have done things differently. I mean, my question to her would be is like, okay, so what do you think you did wrong? Because I don't think she even knows what they did wrong, because they seem to be pushing that same message over and over, and they conveniently need somebody to throw under the bus, and they've all decided that now is the time to throw Justin Trudeau under the bus.
Yeah, though she sort of raised quite a lot of eyebrows because she was the ultimate loyalist in both of the debates in Montreal. She was the one that kind of like chirped up and said like, let's remember Justin Trudeau did X, Y, Z, and he's a great guy kind of thing. And she was the one that backed the carbon tax, which is
Yep.
generally considered to be the policy that finished him off in the end. But she's there being loyal. So, I mean, I haven't actually seen this, but they did, for some bizarre reason, they did like a massive press conference right after they'd just done a debate. I really don't understand why they did that, but she must have been asked the question then. She must have been asked, are you too much like Trudeau? Why are you so reluctant to criticize him? And then she's come out and said this, which
Yeah.
isn't a criticism, really, is it? She hasn't really said anything, but there
Yeah,
you go.
no, because there's no substance to it, and this is again another Blacklock story. And so you can subscribe to their stuff if you go to Blacklocks, and it's $314 a year, like, well spent $314. Um, but I mean, she should be saying what it is she raised her voice, and why wasn't she raising her voice publicly at the time?
Indeed, and that's also a question that should be put to Chrystia Freeland. Why did it take the most extreme imaginable kind of almost like workplace bullying? Why did it take that for her to quit? Why didn't she quit over all the other things that she claims that she didn't support?
Yeah, and then there's some quite a bit of questions out there on what Mark Carney's claims, and a lot of them revolving around the moving of his company to the United States, Brookfield Asset Management, and then also saying that he told reporters that he was helped on a budget when he clearly was still in school and that. So we're going to play this clip from CBC, actually.
Race, but now the party's perceived frontrunner is being accused of not telling the truth. The opposition says Mark Carney is lying about his role in the relocation of the head office of a major Canadian company to the United States. The host of Power Politics, David Cochrane, walks us through the controversy.
Yeah, the controversy here really stems from the answer that Mark Carney gave last night after the Liberal leadership debate in the scrum with reporters when he was asked about what role he played in the relocation of the headquarters from Brookfield Assets Management from Toronto to the United States. And in his answer, this was the company, that Brookfield Assets Management, of which Mark Carney was the chair, until he resigned in January to seek the Liberal leadership. And when he was asked about this relocation, he said, this was formally approved after I had left, and kind of left it there. But if you go back and look at it all, Ian, this was something that was started, proposed, announced, formalized, and then broadly put to shareholders while Mark Carney was the chair of the board, and he wrote a letter endorsing the move. And in fact, the official re-registration of the corporate headquarters from Toronto to the United States happened in October of last year, before Donald Trump was reelected, before Chrystia Freeland had resigned, before any of the big seismic political events had happened. So he was there. I mean, he was a big part of this. The timeline and the paper trail shows that he advocated for this and he pushed for it. Now, the reason for this, it's not necessarily corporate flight from Canada and a reflection of the Canadian economy. It's that Brookfield Assets Management, as part of its growth strategy, it's a subsidiary of the larger Brookfield Corporation, which is a major company here in Canada. It needs to be headquartered in New York to get access to shareholders in the United States, or it needs to be headquartered in the United States, and they get access to stock indexes, and ultimately it wants to be on the Standard & Poor's 500. You have to be registered in the U.S. to do that, whether Donald Trump is president, whether Kamala Harris or Joe Biden had won the last election. So it is the move seen as moving a very important company in Canada out of Canada to the United States, and the very fine parsing of the answer last night from Carney that Liberals see as a sign of maybe his developing political communication skills, and as you heard from the Liberals there, Ian, they call it a flat out, or sorry, the Conservatives, they call it a flat out lie.
Okay, so speaking of the Conservatives, let's hear what...
There you go. Seems like they're running cover for Mark Carney. They're saying they're making excuses. They moved the headquarters. That's the one thing that he's not being exactly honest with there. They moved the headquarters. They don't have to move the headquarters to trade on, the exchanges in the United States, the New York Stock Exchange or the NASDAQ. You can have Canadian companies here that trade on those exchanges. They actually move the headquarters. So they literally move jobs there because that's where those people would be working.
I'm not sure I understand what he was trying to say there, this CBC reporter, when he was trying to say like you have to do that. I'm certainly not, I'm not aware of that being the case, that you have to put your headquarters in the US to be able to register on the S&P. I mean, that just isn't true, is it? I've never heard that before. But
No.
I mean, either way, what I would have said here is, who cares? None of that is important anyway. The issue here is that Mark Carney is accused of telling a lie. That's the center of this. It doesn't matter what he lied about. The accusation is that he lied. So did he lie or didn't he lie? That's what the CBC should be asking and investigating.
But they seem to spend more time and energy on saying why he moved the company there, as opposed to addressing what you just said, addressing they even say later in that clip, they even say, he's not politically savvy yet, so maybe he didn't answer that question correctly. No, I mean, they basically tossed Christy Clark out of the Liberal leadership race for a lie. And here's even, I would say, a similar type lie. Christy Clark lied about being registered as a Conservative, and she was basically tossed like in a couple of days. And here's Mark Carney, caught not in one lie, but the second one is that he said he helped on the 1998 federal budget when he was a student at Oxford.
Yeah, well, I feel with I think you're right to say that obviously that's why she was ditched, Christy Clark. But I would say it was like when you look at it in a little bit more detail, and we talked about this at the time, I think like the reality is that all politicians lie and deceive, basically every single one. You know, if you're on a team and listening to this, even you would have to concede, um, theoretical listener out there, that your people lie and deceive. They all do it. Every single leader now in Canada lies and deceives. But it's almost like the nature of the deceit, and that is why Christy Clark was dumped, because she showed herself to be an amateur. It was humiliating. It was a pathetic sight, wasn't it? It was pitiful, and so therefore she was ditched because what we heard then from the sort of Liberal insiders was she's nowhere near ready. She can't possibly go into the big leagues. But what I find interesting is they're now saying that about Mark Carney behind the scenes, you know, and that's what that CBC reporter said. He said, you know, Liberal defenders will say he's not quite, he's not like a seasoned politician. He's not ready. But then the question has to be, so that means that both Christy Clark and Mark Carney weren't ready. So why was Mark Carney given the red carpet treatment while Christy Clark was just kicked to the curb? You know, what's the difference? Why were they treated so differently?
Yeah, it's kind of odd again from the self-proclaimed feminist leader, prime minister. It seems to be a lot of women that get kicked to the curb.
Yep, and and again, I mean, this is certainly, I don't relish saying this, but people who aren't white, you know, the people that Justin Trudeau and the Liberal Party like to give special treatment to and pretend that they need to be protected and boosted and all the rest of it. Why is it that the two people who aren't white were also kicked out of this race? This is the party that, you know, represents itself as the only party that cares about sort of racial justice or whatever language they want to use. If that's the case, and also the only party that cares about feminism, if that's the case, why have they kicked all of these people out and given all of their backing to the white gentleman?
And then making excuses. This is the part that I have trouble with CBC, basically, instead of going after that. Because, you know, and then even saying, like, oh, it's the Conservatives accusing them of lying. Well, I mean, it's pretty clear. Like the paper trail, they even have the paper trail themselves. It's clearly a lie.
Well, yeah, but the problem is in the world of journalism, when you're writing a story, you're talking about a story in an objective way rather than editorial or anything like that. The problem is the word lie is very specific. To lie means that you know the truth, but you misrepresent it. You say something else instead, intentionally. Whereas in this situation, Mark Carney could theoretically say, "Oh, that just slipped my mind and I forgot." It was like I stated a mistruth or I accidentally stated a falsehood. Like that, and then that isn't lying. So there's like that's almost like the very fine grain kind of almost like a legal argument that you often hear.
Yeah, Christy Clark tried exactly what you said, and it didn't work for her either.
No, it doesn't work because it goes into the court of public opinion, doesn't it? In questions matters of that sort, and then the public knows what they see and makes the decision. But I mean, a journalist like the CBC guy there, I find that I can't even remember that guy's name, but he's usually for the CBC political team, which is pretty bad in general. I would say he's probably their best or one of their best reporters, and I think he can't outright say this is a lie, but I mean maybe what he should have said was, it certainly looks to be the case based on the evidence that Mark Carney uttered
No,
a falsehood.
but if you watch it all the way, they hung it all on the Conservatives and spent the majority of the time making excuses for why the company moved to the United States.
Indeed, and that was the headline that I saw. The headline that I saw began with the word conservatives. It was conservatives attack or something like that. Conservatives accuse Carney of lie.
Yeah, it's all in the framing,
to
right?
focus on the actual center of the story, which is Mark Carney.
It's all in the framing, for sure. Let's move on to Danielle Smith and Scott Moe. Scott Moe first put out there effective immediately. All pipeline permits going west, east, south received in Saskatchewan will be considered pre-approved. So he's getting ahead of it. And then Danielle Smith is jumping on it, and she's saying, yeah, and she's asked her province to align with Saskatchewan, and it's time for a Team Canada and get things moving. And then they've also challenged other provinces to join in on this. And so far, it's just the two of them that I've heard that are ready to get going. And they're the ones with the energy and the resources.
No surprises there.
They're the ones with the energy and the resources, right? And everybody else. I mean, again, if we go back to Karina Gold's tweet, her tweet from a long time ago, it says we need to figure out a way to landlock Alberta's resources so they can't get them to market. She should still answer for that.
Well, she did at the time. Her claim at the time was that it was like a that it was almost like a retweet, that it was a template that people had been handing around, and she just posted the template. But that isn't an excuse, obviously, is it?
No.
It's a very she still put it out there, so it's still her, she still approved of it. But I mean, this thing with Saskatchewan and Alberta, we see these two provinces on the same side often, don't we? And like you say, it's not a coincidence that they are also the two provinces that have like pretty much the lion's share of natural resources, or at least ones that are very kind of popular right now. But they're also something that we didn't mention there. They're also the agricultural powerhouses of Canada. They feed Canada too, these two provinces. They have the best land in Canada, the most arable land, and they produce a lot of crops. And obviously, in Alberta, particularly ranching, which produces a lot of meat. So, like their importance to Canada cannot be understated. These two provinces are like they are the jewels in the crown in so many ways.
And BC used to be one of them as well. BC used to be a big contributor, but we've really kind of like lost our way in BC with falling GDP and like our forestry sector and resource sector have been on the decline.
Yeah, well, it used to be those three, didn't it? I mean, and also probably Manitoba you would include in that. They used to be the West, the proper Western provinces, and they used to be just like the American West. They used to be a lot more kind of libertarian and pro-business. But obviously, BC is not that anymore. It's now, because the population is so urbanized, it's really just Vancouver versus everybody else. As a consequence of that, they act like urbanites, and they have, they have the sort of interests of urbanites, and they're not really that different from people in Toronto and Montreal, and that's why they've all left. And then with Manitoba, that seems to be a different question, but they've also kind of they're not really that anymore, libertarians or pro-business anymore either. But yeah, it's very interesting because Donald Trump, I think it was yesterday, was asked a question about Canada. I don't know if you heard that, where somebody asked him, like a friendly journalist, evidently, said, "Can you fill us in on the plan to annex Canada?" And then he said, "I've been hearing from some Canadians that the key to do it is first get Alberta. Get them to leave and then absorb Alberta. Then, if Alberta leaves, Saskatchewan will leave. Then bring them in." So it's kind of like, the Americans who apparently have their eyes on annexing this country, they know that Alberta and Saskatchewan feel quite shafted by the current arrangement, and that now it's been brought to Trump's attention. I don't know if he's gonna target those provinces.
Yeah, it's kind of odd that Alberta and Saskatchewan have been bringing the bread home for Canada, and yet Quebec seems to be the tail that wags the dog all the time. And I think more of that has to do with Trudeau needing that electoral vote than anything to do with what's good for Canada.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the creation of Canada as well. Like, in some ways, as people who've read their history will know, in actually many ways, Canada was conquered by the British like almost accidentally. They didn't really expect that to happen, and it just happened to be the case that James Wolfe was like a genius general, and he went in and slapped New France and conquered Quebec and defeated the French army, and then all of a sudden the British were stuck with, when the USA split off a couple of decades later, they were stuck with this British North America, which was full of French Catholics, and obviously Britain was a very Protestant empire. It was a British English-speaking Protestant empire, and they were stuck with all these French Catholics, and they just compromised, and they kept on compromising, and they had to do it to keep the place, to keep it together and functional, and to stop civil war breaking out. And then the consequence, 200 or more years later, is that these people, the sort of descendants of those French Catholics, have an enormous amount of power, and it's kind of built into the system that they almost have a veto over the rest of the country, don't they?
Yeah, so the poll, this recent poll from Abacus, still shows the Conservatives with a strong lead. Conflicting with those Ecos polls and Leger polls, and you're going to do a story on that, I think, later today, comparing all these polls. But you said this poll tends to be more conservative friendly.
Well, yeah, I guess they would probably push back against that the idea that they're friendly to the Conservatives, but they tend to show the Conservatives. I mean, they had them, like I said to you earlier, they had them 30 points up in November, which is, from 30 points down to what people are suggesting now. Seems insane, doesn't it? It seems like unfathomable kind of turnaround. But no, in general, yeah, they've given the Tories a pretty healthy majority, pretty healthy lead. But if you follow these people, I think you got this tweet here is from that Politics Canada account, isn't it? If you follow these like poll nerds, the people who are obsessed with polls, they know about the sort of they tend to refer to some pollsters as being favorable to one party or another. And yeah, I mean that's certainly the attitude in the poll nerd world. And Abacus, I think, is generally considered to be pro-Tory. So make of this poll what you will.
Is Jagmeet Singh a serious politician? Like, I mean, what he said yesterday, just the rhetoric that he said was just completely unhinged. Saying that, like there's a G7 meeting here in Canada and saying not allowing Donald Trump into Canada. That might be the end of the G7 if you think about it, because if you look at who's in the G7, and if they were made to choose between Canada and the United States, I think the majority of them would go with the Americans, and that includes Japan, France, Germany.
That's the power that the Americans have. They
the
can
United
peel
Kingdom.
off the rest of them.
And it would just basically say Canada would be on the outside looking in, just like we are right now when, President Macron was just in the White House. And, they did a big TikTok video of how great the friendship is between the French and the Americans. And then here's Jagmeet Singh with this rhetoric that is just crazy. Like it's just completely unhinged. I mean, he doesn't really have any power, but he definitely still influences Canadians into this rhetoric about, like really this posturing and, calling him I don't know. Yeah.
He's a bit like it's almost like a bit like a newspaper columnist or something, or a late night talk show host sometimes, isn't he, saying the way that he speaks. But then again, I can't help, you describe, or you're asking the question, is he a serious politician and all the rest of it? I can't help but think about the man that he's referring to. I mean, Donald Trump is even more ridiculous and extreme than even Jagmeet Singh. The only difference is Donald Trump has power, a lot of power, whereas Jagmeet Singh doesn't really have much.
For sure. Somebody asked us to read what this is. So this is from the NDP account as well. Donald Trump has threatened our sovereignty, our people, and the world's stability. He's not welcome in Canada. And then he goes on to say, what do you call a guy who threatens his allies, including with the use of military force? I'm not sure about that. Spreads disinformation, proclaims he's above the law, and fires anyone who won't do what he says, and even those in law enforcement and military. And then he ends with a fascist. So.
Yeah, I mean, that is just a bit ridiculous, isn't it? I mean, the thing is, and Karina Gould said this, of all people, who's probably the most left-wing of all of the liberal leadership contenders. She said a couple of nights ago, we have to speak to Donald Trump. Like, we might not like him, but he's the leader of the most powerful country in the world and our most important trading partner, and et cetera, et cetera. We must speak with him. And of course, that's true. We must speak with him. Just like we pretty much must speak with Vladimir Putin as well, and Xi Jinping in China and all the rest of them. We have to speak to these people. It's ridiculous to talk about banning them from the country and just throwing insults at them. What is the point of that?
And then, not to be outdone, here's Chrystia Freeland and her. Let's play this clip.
The U.S. is turning predator. And so what Canada needs to do is work closely with our democratic allies, our military allies. I've been foreign minister. I know how to do that. That's why I would start with our Nordic partners, specifically Denmark, which is also being threatened, and our European NATO allies. I would be sure that France and Britain were there, who possess nuclear weapons. And I would be working urgently with those partners to build a closer security relationship that guarantees our security in a time when the United States can be a threat.
And I'm going to say, what? Nuclear weapons?
Yeah, I mean, I sense that she would not be using this kind of language if she was the leader of the Liberal Party. I think she's using that kind of language because she wants to be the leader of the Liberal Party. So to obtain that that title, she has to persuade Liberals, not just Liberals, but ones who are actually so hardcore with politics that they actually sign up to be Liberals. So that's who she's trying to appeal to there, rather than to the nation of Canada, which is a bit more moderate than Liberal voters.
I would suggest she buys a television set or a computer and goes on there and says and takes a look at what President Macron just recently said about the United States, and see if you think that you're going to get them to you're going to hide under their nuclear arsenal. Like, Canada has been relaxed underneath, or is comfortable underneath the military might of the United States. And we've done that, and that's why we've let our military go. And that's on us. We did that. We allowed our military to become almost, completely insufficient for what we're supposed to be doing. And, I think she also put out a tweet where somebody says we need to increase our GDP and said not just increasing the wages of the current soldiers, which we need to do. But that's not how you increase the NATO spending. You got to actually make a military that makes sense. And her response was, just watch me. She's not serious. She's not a serious politician. Like, she's clearly, like this rhetoric here, I mean, her and Jagmeet, they should form their own party.
Well, people have actually been saying that, haven't they? That NDP and Liberals are so close now that they might as well just get together and be friends. But yeah, the thing about, I think there's an interesting point there, though, about nuclear weapons. Because as Trump continues to insult and alienate and threaten his allies, basically all of his allies, that question is going to be raised, isn't it? Because the Americans created the post-war, post-Second World War international order, and then the post-Cold War one after that, which is like a modification. They created that over many years, and they did it for themselves. They didn't do anybody any favors. Something that I would like to see Canadian politicians articulate, and they haven't really done that yet. But they did it for themselves. Bretton Woods, NATO, all the rest of it. They did it for themselves. They didn't do it out of kindness. Americans don't do anything out of kindness, as anybody that knows Americans will tell you. It's always a deal. They always have to get something for it. And in exchange for all this, in exchange for subordinating Canada and Europe underneath their, generous umbrella, as they like to put it, they got global dominance, basically. And that's what they wanted, and that's what they got. So for them now to suddenly start talking about Europeans and Canadians as freeloaders and all the rest of it, and that they're going to be pushed outside of the umbrella potentially. I mean, that is to actively act against US policy over the last 80 years or more, what they've created for themselves. And, let's imagine if Canada was actually kicked out of the umbrella. What would they do? Any responsible Canadian leader would then have to create a nuclear weapon. You couldn't go around not being protected. We've seen what happens to countries that aren't protected by nukes, like Ukraine. They just get slapped and conquered, and their land is stolen. So it's all just a bit confusing, isn't it? There's so much hypocrisy and deceit in this debate, and I just feel like there are so few people that are willing to actually just tell the truth as it is, and that includes our dear Chrystia.
Pierre Poilievre, this is the tweet that he put out there. Speaking of Mark Carney, and he puts the timeline down there. So this is the timeline that he says for Mark Carney's accusing him of lying. November 5th, Trump elected president. On November 25th, Trump threatens Canada with tariffs. December 1st, Carney letter announces Brookfield board, which he chairs, and I saw the letter and his signatures at the bottom, unanimously voted to move the company's headquarters from Canada to the U.S. And then February 25th, Carney denies involvement in moving headquarters. And February 26th, Conservative produced the document that was signed by Mark Carney. There you go. There's the receipts.
As written out by the Conservatives, we should. I'm sure the Liberals would like to modify those receipts, but they haven't denied that. They haven't denied that letter is valid, that is authentic. So
I did see the letter, yeah. So Ruby Dalla, still out there. She's been on quite a few podcasts lately. She's trying to get the money back to the donors. She's not trying to get the money for herself. She's trying to say, if you kick me out, then give the money back to the donors. And I'm sure the Liberals would like to keep it for their campaign that they're going to be running here right away.
Yeah, it's such an awkward situation, isn't it? It's very much like dirty laundry territory for the Liberals, this, isn't it? And I think she's pretty committed to keeping that laundry dirty. So we'll see what happens over the months of this.
It does seem right, that the money was given for Ruby Dalla to run, and then they kick her out, then those people should get their money back because she wasn't afforded the chance to run.
Yeah, but I suppose there'll be something in the terms and conditions that said, if you violate any of these rules and you're kicked out, then
I'm sure there is.
Money's forfeit.
I'm just talking from the moral point of view. I'm not talking about their legal mumbo jumbo way, but yeah, I'm sure that.
Yeah, well, political party and moral don't really belong in the same sentence, do they?
I'd bet that the money does not go back to the donors, that they're going to. They probably all spent it on that big red background they ran for that debate that night.
I would imagine that money is going to go straight into Mark Zuckerberg's back pocket so that they can post videos on Meta while talking about how Meta endangers democracy.
And how the rest of the media can, we're going to put out a story here, and it shows 420 outlets in the past decade have gone by the wayside, and 3 that are going in the next month here in May, they're closing down because of just less Canadians accessing news. And this is all to do with that Bill C-18. Traffic to most websites are down 50% since the Meta ban. And
yeah,
CBC,
and
they're talking about doubling CBC's budget at the same time. So they get that one voice that seems to be carrying the water for them, and then the rest of the independent journalism and small media outlets can do what they're supposed to do, I guess. Die.
It's not. It's not only that they want to have CBC as kind of like the lone big voice, but it's also they've put the CBC and their employees in quite a difficult situation, haven't they? In a difficult position. Pascal Santonge made that announcement. Like, not only do I want to keep the CBC going, but I want to double the money and make it an even bigger deal, make it like even better funded. So they've got that from the Liberals, and then the Conservatives are saying they want to defund the CBC. And this is months before an election. I mean, they've put the employees of the CBC in a very, very difficult situation where it's like they can either uphold neutrality and potentially lose their livelihoods, or they can be biased towards the Liberals and keep their jobs. It's that is kind of like on the verge of election interference almost. I would wager.
I would say it's pretty close. Just somebody was writing a thing here. We don't get any funding, just so we're clear. Kelowna now gets 0 funding from the federal government, and we don't believe anybody should get funding. But we also believe that Bill C-18 should be repealed and get back the audience of 200,000 that we earned over 10 years serving our community. And that's been taken away from us in supposedly them helping independent media outlets by taking away our audience and not giving us funding, and meanwhile funding a select media group in Canada. Well, and if we look at the stock charts on many of these outlets, including Glacier Media, Post Media, Chorus, they're all in abysmal shape and all going the wrong way. So their plan to help media has been nothing but, it seems like, a plan to get more funding for the CBC.
Sadly.
There you go. And then there's a protester out in front of in Ottawa there. You can probably go visit him. You can maybe do a story with him. Right now he's the only guy out there with his sign, Canada needs a Doge. And you and I talked about how Kevin O'Leary should take on that job. And but he's all by himself right now, and I'm not sure if Trudeau will go out and talk to him or freeze his bank account. There's a joke for you. Right?
Well, where he is there, Wellington Street. That is where the truckers were based along there, and indeed they did get. It was actually, what is it, 3 years? Is it 3 years now?
Yeah,
3 years to the day
just
when
over
they
3
were,
years. Just over 3 years.
So he should walk carefully there. He should make sure he's got a Swiss bank account, perhaps.
And watch out for horses. There you go. I wonder if they would do the same treatment for Kevin O'Leary if he was standing out there with his sign. Maybe we got to get that message.
Nobody's too big to debank.
There you go. And then you're going to hire the central banker who suggested that, actually. You know, there's a lot of people saying that Mark Carney gave that advice to Trudeau to debank people because he's the banker, the central banker. He says you want to cut off people's supply or their basic life, cut off their bank. Because it is. Like, if you cut off somebody's ability to buy things, that's it, right?
Totally. Well, it's everything, isn't it? You couldn't possibly hope to find like a rental or get a mortgage or even get a job. You can't do anything with that bank account. So
there you go. If you want more of that, there you go. And then let's move on to some of the other stuff in the world news here. They arrested Georgescu from the guy that supposedly won the Romanian election, and then it was overturned by the courts. And now they arrested him, and then they released him today. So that's him coming out, and we're not going to play this clip, but if you're interested in that, you can go watch that. So this is him coming out of jail because there was massive protests that are about to happen there. So
I had a quick read about what the charges were, and the prosecutors have come out and said that he's being investigated for providing false information and false statements. And also for setting up an organization with fascist, racist, or xenophobic characteristics. So pretty vague, really, as a way to arrest somebody that won the first round of the presidential election in your country.
So for lying,
but this is kind of where we've been trending, isn't it? This is the language we've heard, and we talked about the debanking there and the truckers' protest. Very, very similar language was used to justify. Turning all the sort of apparatus of the state against them, and to do extra constitutional actions against them.
Yeah, there you go. And then Trump comes out with a weird, whatever, I don't know what they call it on Truth Social, tweet, whatever they call it on Truth.
They call them truths.
Oh, he comes out with a truth then.
Very ironic that he should call his platform Truth when it's something that he's not very good at telling.
Anyway, he goes on to say that Wayne Gretzky is the great one, and Wayne has asked them to lay off Canada. But I don't know this. I'm puzzled when I read this. It sounds like he's actually going to be nice to Canada, and then I guess he was just being nice to Wayne and Janet, and I think that they are friends with each other. So. And then there's no doubt that Wayne Gretzky has done lots for Canada, and there's a lot of people that were trying to rename Wayne Gretzky Drive in Edmonton. They should try to remember all the stuff that Wayne Gretzky has done and brought pride and honor to this nation before they get the noose out and go after him after like some politicians and media outlets want to paint him with a brush. I was in Edmonton when Wayne Gretzky was and the Oilers were in their heydays. It was one of the best times ever for Canadian sport.
Yeah, well, he's a bit of a legend, isn't he? But it just goes to show that, there's no There's no escape from these times that we live in, these sort of hyper-politicized times. Even somebody like Gretzky, who's basically like a demigod that walks among the Canadian people, isn't it? That was kind of his role in
Yeah.
Canadian culture before this. But even he can tumble. That's how
Well, I mean,
extreme the
like I said,
times are.
when the wolves go after something, they don't want to let up, right? Anyway, now Canada obviously needs to work on more partners, and we should have been doing this a long time ago. That's where these pipelines should have been built and all that. We should have been so reliant on one customer. That's just bad business, period. It doesn't matter if that customer is good or bad. You shouldn't be so reliant on one person.
Yeah, I mean, especially the United States, which is infamous throughout its history for betrayal. It's betrayed pretty much every country that it's ever had a relationship with. It has betrayed them. I mean, it was always going to betray Canada, and it did betray Canada if you look at not so long ago, in up to and including invasion and attempted conquest.
I would
So yeah, it was inevitable and a very, very, I mean, extraordinarily foolish to
I
put
would
all of your
say
eggs in that basket.
if you look at the Liberal leadership over the past 10 years, we squandered 10 years of not developing business relationships in other countries, developing resources here in Canada. And we spent a lot of that time on publicly shaming different aspects of our nation, even talking about a post-national state, and then working on issues that were like, specific to small segments of the population. And then, basically, like Justin Trudeau's been accused of like some of the rhetoric that he put out there. You just talked about it, like when he blamed anybody that wouldn't take the vaccine as homophobic, misogynist, and used that language lots of times. We spent more time doing that than we did on developing Canada as a nation.
Well, that's certainly reading between the lines. That's kind of how Mark Carney put it, and very, very gently and politely said that there hasn't been enough focus on the economy under the leadership of Justin Trudeau. And I think you would probably struggle to find any, even, like diehard liberal that would say differently. I do think it was kind of taken for granted that Canada would always be prosperous, it would always be rich, and that it was in this luxurious position where it could sabotage its own industries, particularly obviously natural resources, and still be rich. I think there was this assumption that it could take those kind of moral, as they were described, decisions, and it could take massive risks, massive gambles on new technologies like the renewables, which haven't made any countries rich as of yet. And now here we stand with a really deflated GDP per capita and this trade war with the US, where we look very weak and vulnerable. And all of a sudden, it doesn't really look like that was an astute judgment made
Yeah,
by the Trudeau government.
If you look at one of the main platforms for the Trudeau government, which was climate change, and if you look at our contribution to carbon, which is way down on the list, like if you say in the top like 10 countries, we're down near the bottom, right? Insignificant compared to China and the US and a bunch of other countries. Yet our measures to counteract climate change have been near the top, actually, like this glowing example for the world. So we've sacrificed the wealth and prosperity of our nation. And many people question why. Even Mark Carney is saying, I don't know if he's because he's a climate guy too, but we've been focusing on the wrong things.
Yeah. And then the other country that's gone really hardcore is represented by a flag there in that image, the British.
Yeah.
They've probably, of all the major economies in the world, the British have taken net zero the most seriously, and gone the most all in on it.
And they're in worse shape than us.
If you've got 5 or 10 minutes, have a look at how the British economy is performing. Just have a look. Have a look at the standard of living in that country now, and how desperate people are for the basics, like being able to turn on a heater for an hour. Look how desperate they are in that country.
And you left the jolly old England for here, and maybe you made the wrong choice. It just seems like following you around.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, I guess, on that one, won't we? But no, I would still say Canada is a much more geographically fortunate country. And I know that sounds funny, I'm saying that when there's like snow coming down outside, but in terms of the resources, like hydropower is like that is like the gods have come down and patted you on the head if you have hydropower, and Canada has it in abundance. And then on top of that, the oil, the gas, and all the rest of it. I mean, Canada has it. It's just a question of finding the will to actually use it.
We've said this on the show many, many times. Canada is one of the richest resource nations in the world, and plus the diversity of our resources make us, the I would say the jewel on this planet. Like we are, not only rich in resources, the diversity of our resources is just, I think the only nation that could challenge us in a similar way would be Russia itself, this largest landmass on the.
Yeah, I think it's Russia, Canada, the US, and then Australia. Maybe you could throw in the Congo and Brazil. Like those countries are just so far ahead of everybody else in terms of resources, and we're in that category. We should be very happy about that.
We have the diversity though that many of them don't. Like Australia does not have the diversity. They are strong in many things, coal and different things like that, uranium and stuff like that, and gold. But they don't have the diversity that Canada has in all the natural resources that we have, including agriculture and including hydroelectric.
Yeah, in that sense, the only two rivals to Canada, Russia and the United States. Yeah.
So hydroelectric, like water, like fresh water, Canada, like I think clearly number one.
Anyway. Yeah, I think that is correct. But in terms of like percentage of hydropower, so like I think it's Norway actually, that blessed land, the land of the Vikings, they have like basically 100% hydropower.
Yeah. Canada deports more people, and then predominantly those are people that have been rejected for refugee status. That number's not very high.
Yeah. It's like 7,500. Yeah, it isn't that impressive, but yeah, it's like a lot of it's these students as well, as I'm sure people have been reading, the students that come here on international visas, usually from India, and then when they realize that they're going to have to go home, they claim asylum. I mean, which is bananas. I mean, even Mark Miller said that's nuts.
It's 7,300, but that's a 95% increase over 2022. Basically, they weren't deporting anybody. You could do whatever you wanted, even if your claim didn't work, you can just stay. So, and there's been tension put on it now, and then all of a sudden they're doing something. And here's an interesting one. The Supreme Court of Canada says they're not going to use X anymore. So there you go. They're going to invite you to join them on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Well, good bully for you. You get to use Facebook and Instagram, and we do not. So there, you run the courts. Why don't you fix it for the media outlets? If you think Facebook and Instagram are important to the Supreme Court of Canada, maybe you could use your power and make the Bill C-18 go away and allow media outlets to use Facebook and Instagram. Isn't that like kind of like weird?
It is a little bit odd. It's a little bit hypocritical, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's like, Facebook for me, but not for thee.
Right, and here's the courts that could actually say something, and they're just like, yeah, Facebook and Instagram are important to get our message out, but for news outlets, not so much.
But also, they didn't actually say this explicitly, but they've obviously done this because of Elon Musk and because the sort of people that run Twitter accounts and the sort of people, I'm very, very sorry, almost sickened to say, but the sort of people that run courts are left-wing activists, like of a left-wing activist mentality. So they obviously absolutely despise Elon Musk, who's a right-wing activist. But I mean, it's funny that they've done that. And then instead they say, we invite you to follow us on a platform owned by Bill Gates, 2 platforms owned by Mark Zuckerberg, or the monopoly video platform owned by Google. So it's like, okay, let's go over to these guys who have absolutely no, they have nothing said against them ever, because they're all good guys, unlike Elon.
Well, I mean, Facebook and Instagram, Mark Zuckerberg is buddying up with Donald Trump and with Elon Musk. So LinkedIn, Bill Gates so far has been frozen out of that, but and Google itself is actually making moves towards that side of the table. Gene Hackman, who's starred in many movies, including Superman, the Hoosiers, the Unforgiven, yeah. Him and his wife, a young, I think Gene Hackman, 93 or something like that, and his wife was 65 maybe or something, somewhere around there. And then the dog, so all found dead in their
Very
home.
sad.
Yeah.
I think I'll always remember him for Unforgiven, which is listed there. That is, he plays such a, how can I phrase this? How can I say this politely? He plays such a nasty guy, such a
Yeah.
horrible person, and he does
That,
it so well in
that was in,
Unforgiven that you really cheer against him, and that's a real talent, I think.
and that was Clint Eastwood, right?
Yeah, Clint Eastwood plays. But Clint Eastwood plays like a bit of an anti-hero on that one, so he's
Yeah.
kind of you don't really love him because he's a bit of a sort of unpleasant guy in his own way too. But like Gene Hackman is like he was very good at that. But then he could also, on the other hand, he could also play the nice guy and the kind of like no nonsense protector, couldn't he? He also had that up in his locker. Very good actor.
Yeah, Hoosiers was a really good movie, and then Superman, the older Superman movies, he played Lex Luthor in that show.
Yeah,
93 though?
that's what he did. He bounced between good and evil, didn't he?
There you go. Let's move on to markets. Gold, just below that $2,900 mark there. You can see it's starting to, there's an annual chart there showing a year. It's starting to play with that line a little bit. Not much movement there. And crypto, though, definitely struggling. So is it going to try and fill that gap down to 70,000? That gap up again was Donald Trump being elected, and basically it gapped up just right after that election and just kind of went on a tear. The markets, everything's kind of like selling off a little bit in the last little while here, and I think all these tariffs definitely scaring the markets in general, and that's what's the puzzling part is, Donald Trump seems to love the markets, maybe likes the volatility, because all the markets seem to be off a little bit, and now threatening the European Union with tariffs, so the markets themselves selling off, and here's the Canadian dollar. Again, the tariffs, that deadline coming up, and the Canadian dollar starting to sell off as well, below that 70-cent mark again. So not good. We got something really cool for you to watch, though. We got a video here to show you of the Firefly, the lunar lander, and you got a little video here. You're going to play that clip. So there you go, that's Firefly, the Blue Ghost, and it'll land somewhere in Mare Crisium on the near side of the moon on March 2nd. So that's pretty cool stuff. If you want to go on X, you can find that Firefly there, and you can watch that moon stuff. It's pretty cool, actually.
Sorry, who is that? That's NASA, is it?
It's Firefly. No, it's a small company, Firefly. They use SpaceX to launch that, so they got a ride with SpaceX, and this is their thing.
Very, very cool. It's good to see all these like lesser known companies getting up there and doing stuff, isn't it?
We're going to miss our EV segment because I do have a call coming. We got the Big White Report coming up, so I'm going to go quick. We got two memes here to show you, though. These ones are funny. We'll show you these two memes. And this is obviously a play on Elon Musk's email thing, and that St. Peter starts asking people at the pearly gates to list 5 ways that they advance God's kingdom on earth before they get to come in.
Looks a little bit like Obi-Wan Kenobi there, St. Peter, doesn't he? Bit sacrilegious.
And then supposedly at noon, I think, they're going to release the Jeffrey Epstein list. Pam Bondi said that. Attorney General Pam Bondi said they're going to release that list. And then, this is saying a black bar visited Epstein Island hundreds of times. So hopefully we get to see more than a black bar.
Yeah, I wouldn't bet the house on it.
There you go. So that's been our news for the really big show today, and we encourage you to watch and converse and comment and all that stuff. And we're starting to stream on Facebook, a different Facebook account we set up before they blocked that one, and an Instagram account we set up a secondary one, not our regular one. So we'll see how long it is before they find it. But there you go. So we're streaming right now on TikTok, YouTube, and X, and then it goes on LinkedIn after, and then we're trying to stream on those other. What's that? Facebook and Instagram too. So there you go. We do thank you for watching, and we'll see you tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock for our Friday show. Until then, we thank you for watching Kelowna Now.